Hi, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Nicole Forskren. She is CEO and Chief Scientist of Dora and also co-founder.
So, thanks everyone for joining. And for that amazing, that's like the best golf clap I've heard. This is definitely the management track. I'm so excited to be here. Okay, so just for kind of a quick pulse check, because I'm curious about how I should position some of this. Who here is like C-suite? Okay, C-suite, like CEO, CTO, CIO, C3PO. Okay, who here is SVP level? Who here is VP level? Who here is director level? Okay, who here is team leads? Who here is going to take over the world as an IC? This is real, because where did DevOps come from, right? Grassroots. So anything that I present here can be applied at any of those levels, although I love that you all decided this was like advanced edition for the presenter, and I'm going to find ways to talk to all of you at once. If any of you take a writing course, they will say never come up with content that is directed to multiple audiences. We're going to do it anyway. This will be fun. Okay, so this is Leading Through Change DevOps Edition. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with me. Probably not. You just got stuck in this room, but we're going to pretend. So I am, as she mentioned, CEO and Chief Scientist at Dora. Is anyone here familiar with the State of DevOps reports? Okay, so I'm the lead investigator on those. That's been 5 years running now with myself. The core team is myself and Jez Humble and Jean Kim. And we've been kind of digging into what types of things drive high-performing technology organizations. Before that, I was a software engineer, I was a sysadmin. But like to all the research, you can't like measure a thing unless you know, or like talk about what drives performance unless you can measure it. You can't measure it unless you define it. I've been working with organizations the last few years on sometimes those findings, right? But also very, very often aligning those findings with their own internal initiatives, whether it's OKRs at the executive level or driving your own localized performance improvements that align to those OKRs, or at the IC level, even if you're in charge of improving build times, what types of things you can do to run an experiment to make your own things better, okay? So, which is a really long way of saying like any talk I give is still probably going to be real numbers focused. So we're going to talk about numbers and why it's important and how it relates. So I'm sure we've all heard of CAMS, culture automation. I'm super in the way. I'm going to come over here. Culture, automation, metrics, and sharing. Have we heard of this? Okay, so this is like DevOps history. I'm also a fan of CALMS, culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing, because we pull so strongly from the lean and agile movements. I really, totally biased. We've fully established the fact that I'm biased, right? I like numbers. I like them because they end up influencing so much of this. And I think we'll cover this in this session today, but metrics end up shaping our culture because, I mean, we're in business, right? So often the things that we do come down to showing value, showing purpose, arguing for or persuading someone else about what it is we care about. And we usually need to do this with data, right? And this often shapes our culture, right? Because it ends up changing the way that we talk about things, changes the incentives, it changes the way that we track things in our organizations. Many times it changes our automation because it changes the purchase decisions that we make, or it even changes the automation decisions that we make because of the data that we want to collect. And or also we hopefully aren't capturing all of these measures by hand. Maybe right at first when we're first trying a couple things out, but long-term hopefully not by hand. Metrics, of course, right? And then sharing, because as we start finding new things out and as we start communicating across the organization, we'll be sharing our information and sharing with others. So I always like starting with this story. I assume we're all familiar with the Amazon shopping cart. We've bought something online. Do we know the genesis here? Has anyone like not heard this story? I love this story. If you've been to one of my talks, you might hear it. So Greg Linden, when he, like back in the day, I think he's still at Amazon. He was at Amazon and he coded up the recommender for the Amazon shopping cart, which I think is dope, or sometimes I don't think it's dope. It gets me in trouble. But he was thinking about the corollary, right? So when we go to the store and we're checking out, there's like candies and mints and magazines and everything. The problem with that is that the magazines that I get are the same as the magazines that you get and are the same as the magazines that you get. And while I'm sure we all have identical, no, we don't, right? We don't have the same things. It works in broadly, right? Like many times we all buy gum. Oprah would be appalled, like she hates gum. Have you guys heard this story? Someone took out gum once and put it on a plate and she threw the entire plate away. Oprah's crazy. But, sorry. He was thinking if I could give someone personalized recommendations, like I will never show Oprah gum, but I like gum, I like particular magazines, I like certain types of things, we could probably make money. He codes this up. He walks into his SVP's office, Senior Vice President, shows him this idea. And SVP's like, cool story. Also no. He's like, what do you mean no? And the SVP makes a really, really good point. And the point is that when I'm at the store, I'm like geographically trapped. Odds are low that I will put down whatever I was putting down, or will like walk away from my time investment of standing in line and just like YOLO out and walk. Occasionally, if I'm really frustrated, I will just leave. But it's pretty unlikely, right? If we've gone through the grocery store and we randomly, like there's a pack of gum there, like we will grab the gum and we will continue to check out. However, who here has been through an online checkout experience that has been trash and has just left? So many hands. That's the big concern. I've wanted to buy something. I'm like, please take my money. Or I just get distracted. I get busy. It takes too long. Squirrel, right? Something happens. He said no. Greg Linden was real sad or frustrated or something. I'm pretending I know Greg. We're buddies. If Greg's in here, hi, let's be buddies. Walks away, goes back to his office, codes up an A/B test and pushes this into prod. I'm sure it's fine, right? Comes back a couple of weeks later with data. This resulted in a few percentage points of revenue. Okay, at Amazon scale? Yeah, this is millions of dollars. Now, the thing that I love about this is the infrastructure was in place, the technology was in place, it was easy to push into prod in, I'm gonna guess minutes, in less than 6 months. So that if it was a bad idea, it would also be easy to push something, pulling it out of prod just as quickly. But this is what he says about it. Building this culture is the key to innovation. Creativity must flow from everywhere. Whether you're a summer intern or the CTO, any good idea must be able to seek an objective test, preferably one that exposes the idea to real customers. Everyone must be able to experiment, learn, and iterate. Position, obedience, and tradition should hold no power. For innovation to flourish, measurement must rule. So yeah, I'm biased to measurement, but you know what? It really influences that culture. And so wherever we are in the organization, whether we're in the C-suite or whether we're an IC, individual contributor, we can use data to help us understand our environments, influence our culture, make strong cases for change. And so much of this first part of this presentation is going to be about data and different ways that we can think about it in our environments. And then the end, I'll talk about specifically about leadership. Okay, so the first is you can't improve what you don't measure. This, we just saw that example from Greg Linden. I said it was a few percentage points, and everyone was like, their eyes got wide. But a few percentage points is actually small. That's really hard to detect in just a few weeks' time. Over the grand scheme, over a year, you could probably tell, but at that point, that's a long time. We don't want to know how things go when they are only epic success or only epic failures. Think about things in terms of risk profile, right? The risks that we adopt, particularly as leaders. If we can enable and create environments that allow people to make small calculated decisions, you know how we always say fail fast? That sounds great. No. Oh, no. I mean, yes. This is the DevOps talk. I have to say yes. Risks favor those in privileged positions. Risks favor those who can afford to fail. Those who can afford to fail, quite often are white men. They are also those who have information and data so that you can catch very, very quickly if it's not going well, so you can back out of your position. If you don't have any of this in place, it's too tricky, it's too difficult, it's too risky. If I have to lay all of my reputation and my entire job on the line to wait 6 months or a year to see if it pays off, if it works, we're like, you're getting a parade. If it doesn't work, you might never get a job again. So think about things like continuous improvement. We can't improve it, or we might not be able to tell anyone about it if we can't measure it. Oh, by the way, this talk is full of cliches, but I'll tell you why the cliches are real. That's one example. And also, by the way, humans are notoriously bad at this. Detecting really small things is difficult unless we have some numbers. We think we're good at intuition. We suck at intuition. We're bad at intuition. Although, let's go ahead and use our intuition to think about experiments we want to do, that Amazon shopping cart example. Get some data. See if it works. Try it again. Reiterate. Roll out a little bit more. See the things that maybe don't work. See the things that, that work that don't work. Okay. One great example here comes from Ronnie Kohavi. So Microsoft, I love this example here. Not to pick on Microsoft, but some people are like, I know exactly what's going to work. Many times people in suits say, I know exactly what is going to work at my organization. And I love Microsoft, not that I'm picking on Microsoft, but if we think about any people in suits or organizations who know damn well their customers, their customer base, a strong history, it's probably going to be Microsoft. I mean, if any of y'all follow me on Twitter, I make a joke pretty regularly that Excel runs the world. Like, this is true. Like, everyone uses Excel, everyone uses Word, everyone, they know their customer base. So Ronnie Kohavi moved to Microsoft after running experiments for years, and he walked into Microsoft and he said, only about 50% of the things that we design and build are actually successful. And Microsoft's like, not us. Maybe for those other people. They kind of had a point. They have a well-designed, strongly mature customer base, very, very mature product line. They know what they're doing. Ronnie Kohavi finally convinced them to build an experimentation platform and found that only 1/3 of the features were successful. And by the way, this isn't features that they YOLO into production. Well-designed, well thought out, very, very, very mature features. 1/3 delivered the value that was expected. 1/3 delivered net null. 1/3 decreased, drove customers away. Don't you want to know which things are driving value and which things are not? If anything, because it takes more time. It introduces more code, which creates more technical debt. That's more for us to manage. It introduces complexity. But without those metrics to help us understand and communicate value, and even define what value is, sometimes we just need to get everyone on the same base. What's value? So when I say what is value, has anyone here heard of The Goal? Maybe? Have you read it? Read it. If you haven't, read it. I was a professor for a few years, and I used to make my students read this book. And they would grumble. And I would just have it be due at the end of the semester because I didn't want to grade their little papers. And finally, at the end of the semester, they would all read it. They would race through it, and then they would all come back and they would say, why didn't you make us read this earlier? This is amazing. This is so great. So the goal is about focusing on what's important. In this case, the goal is, so for those of you who haven't read it, it's about someone who steps in to take over a manufacturing plant that's failing. And if he doesn't, then everyone's going to be out of a job. And he walks in and he's like, well, what do I need to do? I need to reduce inventories. I need to, make the robots work better, or I need to speed up manufacturing. And then he runs into one of his old college, I think he was a philosophy professor, of course, always philosophy professors, Jonah at an airport, who refuses to answer his questions, or refuses to answer his questions directly, but he answers them with more questions. And finally he was like, well, what's the goal? What's the point? You're in business. In this case, he was in business, so what's the point? The point is to make money. So what is our goal? It's to make money. It's to make our customers happy. I've worked with a couple organizations where I walk in and they say, well, we need to do CD. Yeah. Okay, why? We don't do CD for the sake of doing CD. We don't do DevOps for the sake of doing DevOps. It's very important, but hopefully we understand we're doing it in service of a broader goal, in service of delivering value to customers, in service of making our organization money. Or I've worked with several government clients as well, in service of delivering greater effectiveness and efficiency to our end customers, so that the very limited resources that they had could be used to do even more. That which is measured gets managed. So related in business, you kind of are what you measure, right? So once numbers magically appear on a report, so often that's the only thing people pay attention to. Not that you've ever seen this happen. I worked with a company once where they started, they inherited some reporting software that kept track of number of absences for employees, not length of absence. It was just a thing. And suddenly, and then they started rolling this reporting out. It was like a flag that someone turned on by mistake. And they're like, oh, cool, now I have this report. And suddenly managers started caring a lot about how many times people were absent. So if, for example, I was going to be gone on a Monday and a Friday, my manager would suggest that I just take the whole week off. Because being gone for Monday through Friday is one absence. But being on Monday and Friday is 2 absences. By the way, they had an unlimited PTO policy, so it didn't even matter. But once it appears on this, once it appears somewhere in a report, we start paying attention to things. It changes our culture. And so we can think about this ourselves. Again, so think about where you are in your organization and what types of things we want to influence. There can be a lot of value in thinking about what we want to measure and what we want to influence and tracking it and not showing it to anyone for a few weeks or a month until we're sure that that's kind of actually capturing what we think we're capturing. Because we'll start influencing behavior. And then once we've made the change we want to change, just pull it off reports. We run into this problem of saying, well, we can just keep it on the report because it's fine. We can just keep collecting data because it's fine. Except it will continue to solidify that behavior. It sets it in concrete. And if that's no longer important, we just don't need it there anymore. And if we want to move people through a transformation and through change, we want them to focus on whatever the task at hand is. What is our current priority? What is our current constraint? Sometimes those priorities change. Sometimes the measures that were important last quarter are no longer important this quarter. Because we've done amazing, we crossed that hurdle, high fives all around, and then we move on. Related, right? If you only capture one metric, you know what will be gamed. And that's why I picked this, right? Who used to burn things? I love fire. Who used to burn things when you were little? Pretty soon my parents hid the matches. I never burned anything down, I just burned things. But if you give me a magnifying glass, I can focus on one thing enough that it will light on fire. So the trick here is to capture metrics that are in tension. So on the State of DevOps report, we look at software development and delivery. So DevOps, dev and ops. We cannot accomplish the overarching goal while also sacrificing the other team. Global measures focusing on outcomes, not output. Think about something that's in tension. And go ahead and tell your teams that that's what you're doing and that's why. Now, this is particularly relevant when we think about metrics that are easily gamed or can be automated. Does anyone here have a ticket system? Tickets can be automated. I know of organizations, no one in here, where you open a ticket gets opened, especially by end customers. This is the worst by end customers, and it automatically gets closed. The ticket's closed, everything's fine. But if that's your metric, if that's your only end metric, is speed to resolving tickets, killed it. Or like it has to be closed within a certain number of days. I can automate that too. I can close it and I can reopen it. But what's the goal? Making customers happy? You didn't tell me that, you just told me to close the ticket. I can close the ticket and I can automate it and everything's fine. Right? So we should be thinking about all these things together. Not everything that can be counted counts. Again, I kind of alluded to this earlier. Just because we can collect everything doesn't mean, well, we should, but like doesn't mean we should be paying attention to all of it at once. Okay? What do the measures tell me? By the way, this is a fantastic conversation to have with your team, the teams you're leading, as well as the teams that you want to influence or communicate it to. What does this tell me? So I worked in performance for years. So for me, anytime I see response time, I read the word, I see the word, I feel the word performance. Some people just see response time and it just means like response time. Oh no, if anyone ever says response time to me, I hear performance. Every single time. If you're working with another team, ask them what certain data points mean to them. You might be surprised. Because then you're no longer just reporting data, you're reporting a meaning to them. All data are proxies. Data is always a proxy. It always carries meaning for someone else, or has the very strong potential to. Okay? How can I use this to make a decision? If you can't, pull it off of a report. I mean, go ahead and leave it in your database, that's fine. How does it relate to an outcome, right? Again, it should drive an outcome. And then, as I mentioned previously, as we start rolling forward, does it still make sense to measure and track this, or at least keep it on those reports? What are the unintended consequences of this? We'll come back to this one, but this is big. And something that's great is to work with some of your peers and ask them that question directly, right? Ask them that explicitly. Have you seen anything funny happen because of this? I'd like to insert this one here quickly. He wrote the goal, tell me how you measure me and I will tell you how I behave. This is particularly important for those of us who are leaders, and everyone in here is a leader. We have the potential and the opportunity to influence so many people, right? Now, it definitely comes up in metrics, but it comes up in several other things as well. Metrics, because so we say that like money is the currency of business, right? But metrics really are the currency of how decisions get made so often. So, as I mentioned previously, metrics inform our incentives and shape our behavior. So if we think about an example that we're probably all familiar with, right? Look at our traditional dev practices. A metric could be something like delivering code on schedule, the behavior. So if our schedule is Friday, right, because it's always Friday, what's our behavior? We race to get the code done on Friday. When on Friday?
Release 11:59 p.m. on Friday.
Right. And that, right? I mean, hopefully 5, because then we all go to happy hour.
Right.
What's the unintended consequence?
without being without adequate review.
Yep, without adequate review, without adequate test.
And then it's the weekend and change order and we get the weekend.
It's the weekend, we pushed on the weekend. Who did we push to? Right? Ops team spends the weekend putting out fires. But we're at happy hour, so like, DevOps Bingo. I hit DevOps Bingo. Like, sorry, any excuse I get to put this in a deck always makes me happy. Was that our intention? No, of course not. It was never our intention. But when we allow infrequent pushes and pushes on Fridays, especially things, I mean, sure, like, let's say noon. Noon turns into 5, 5 turns into midnight. We've impacted people's evenings and weekends. And it's always the same team. It's always the same team. And then we get this meme with this adorable little girl. Okay, something else. Just because something's hard to measure doesn't mean it isn't worth measuring. Who here thinks surveys are Either you're being nice to me or you've already read part 2 of Accelerate. Really? Like, we can skip this whole section because you already know surveys are amazing? They're not amazing. They totally have limitations. You also have not gotten any political surveys lately because it's fine. Who here loves data in your like system files and log files? Who here uses surveys in your daily work? Fine. Okay, almost no one. Probably because someone, who here has a friend who doesn't trust surveys? Yeah, because people are liars. People are super liars. Who here uses system data and log data in your work often, or has a friend who does? Who here has seen real bad data in your system and log data? Also full of lies. Depending on how you define the word lies. The point is that we can have the same bad data and the same errors in our data, but because we're technologists, like, and by the way, like, I came out of technology. Some people are like, oh, Nicole, you just love surveys because that's what you do. I was a SWE for years. I have a hardware patent. Like, I was coming out of system data hard for years. I only started asking people, I don't know why, like asking people about systems, really? I only started asking people about systems because there were a couple times we were pulling full instrumentation and we had scrubbed that, like we had an entire team working on cleaning up our system data, I want to say for a year. And it was people who highlighted a slight error that we had missed. And it was only people who would have been able to catch that. Some examples, version control. Your system can tell you what's in version control. Your system can never tell you what is not in version control. Some people are like, well, it'll tell me the percentage. Okay, we've all done basic math, right? I don't mean that to sound snarky, sorry. Sometimes snarky is my second language, so it just comes out. How do you calculate percentage, though? The number over the total? We can't get the total from the system because the system doesn't know what's not in it. So if you've got people bypassing version control, sometimes for very, very good reasons, the system will never, ever, ever be able to tell us about it. We can try to come across like second measures of it, right? We can try to pick up pieces downstream for things that were in version control. But I don't know about you, I've seen code that just like camps in version control and never makes it downstream. So what about all the data that's camping in not version control and isn't making it downstream? We still want to know about those assets because there are things that get deployed once a year or once every 4 years that aren't hitting our normal version control systems. And there's very often a team that can tell us about that. Not that I would know. at 2 a.m. that week. So some ways we can do this are through psychometrics. So when I collect surveys now to augment my system data, I use psychometrics. And when we do this, what we do is we collect several different questions. And by the way, I'm bringing this up because we can do this with our system data as well. Who here has seen Office Space? Yeah. So when people are like, people lie. Here's the thing, if hundreds of people lie, or if hundreds of people are taking a survey and 1 or 2 people lie, without like lots of stats background, without a PhD, like y'all don't need to worry about it. If 1 or 2 people lie and hundreds of people survey, it's gonna wash out. If 1 or 2 people backdoor your data, and don't tell me it's not possible, because people in this room can probably do it, you won't catch it. You have low likelihood of catching it. And I know segregation of duties, happy, whatever, pseudo, QSEC offer, we've got it. But what we can do is we can follow psychometric principles. So one example of this, have 2 or 3, remember previously how I said I hear response time? Someone gives me a response time and I immediately feel in my gut performance. Think about what it is you want to measure. Do I want to measure response time or do I really want to measure performance? I really want to measure performance because it's meaningful to me from an outcomes-based point of view. For money, for value, for customer satisfaction, I want to think about performance. So we could all come together. This would be a hell of a team meeting because this is a big team. This is a several pizza team. But if I want to say, I want to measure performance, I'm going to volunteer response time. I'm sure there are a few other measures in this room that people could come up with and help me think about ways to measure response time. And now, on the off chance that some measure goes awry, say response time, not because of an Office Space thing where someone does it intentionally, but as an oops, right? I don't know about you. Your code is perfect. I occasionally wrote code that didn't always be amazing the first time around and still made it past unit tests and function tests, regression tests, and all my other tests. If one of those numbers or one of those metrics goes awry, but you have something called response time, a construct, following psychometric methods, that is, we already know that that's reflected in 2 or 3 data points, and if one of them goes off and the other ones are holding steady, we know to look for it. And then we can do stats tests. So this is how we conduct the research in the state of DevOps reports. We test for bias, we test for 2 types of validity, we test for reliability. But I will say, even like, sometimes I do a real good job of convincing you that surveys are amazing. Even so, continue to be a skeptic. Correlation is not causation. I'm sure you've heard this before. Is anyone here familiar with spurious correlations? Don't Google it now because you will stop paying attention to me. Tyler Vegan does this fantastic blog, website, Tumblr-ish, where he basically goes out and he finds ridiculous data sets and he looks for things that are almost perfectly correlated. So did you know that pool deaths in the US are almost perfectly correlated with Nicolas Cage movies? It doesn't mean one causes the other. Did you know that death by strangulation by bed sheets is almost perfectly correlated with cheese consumption? It doesn't make sense. I think that one's in the book. Because I emailed him, he let me put it in the book. I was super excited. Okay, I can give these examples here, and we're like, that's funny. Of course those have nothing to do with each other. The problem is that when we're working with our system data, it's all interrelated. We can look at something and say, of course those 2 relate. Makes total sense. And we move on with our day. Be a skeptic. 2 things can happen to move together or happen to move in opposite directions. So positively correlated moving together, moving in opposite directions, negatively correlated. When one goes up, the other goes down. And that doesn't mean that one predicts or causes another. It means they just happen to move together. It could be because one is causing another, or it could be that there's something external that's causing them both to move. Still good to watch. So one thing that we measure through surveys is culture. Now, culture, I will say, the best way to measure this is through surveys. We never want to capture this through HR data. We rarely want to capture this through HR data because HR data, at best, is a lagging measure. So when people are like, well, let's do turnover. That's nice, but like turnover is only going to tell you what happened when it's too late. Don't you want to know how your people are feeling before they leave or quit or transfer? Or burn the place down and steal your red stapler? So we can do quick surveys. So this is based on the work by Ron Westrom. He's a sociologist who studied high-risk, highly complex systems that were predictive of performance. By the way, technology is like that, right? Highly complex, high risk. We find that this is predictive of technology performance and organizational performance. And it sounds a lot like culture. When we talk about culture, right? We talk about breaking down silos, we talk about sharing, right? Breaking down silos. Where is it? Bridging. We talk about sharing, cooperation. We talk about blameless postmortems, failure. So here I say failure leads to inquiry, right? Or just like we don't do the thing. Novelty, right? Experimentation. So like who here has a friend that might work in a team like this? This is about a third of the data we've collected over the years. Who has a friend in a bureaucratic organization? It's just narrowly defined. And who has a friend in a generative organization? Performance-oriented, mission-oriented. By the way, this is by teams, not necessarily by organizations, because I'm sure we've seen that there are different pockets. Again, metrics will shape the way that we think about things. Now, Google's Project Aristotle has found similarly that that team dynamics plays a huge role. So they found psychological safety was the biggest predictor in terms of team makeup in what was important. So someone's going to ask me later, like, what's most important for team skills? They found they found nothing statistically significant in terms of team makeup and team skill. That's what they were looking for across over 800 teams. Nada. Psychological safety was number one, followed by meaningfulness of work, clarity, dependability, and impact. Also, clarity, dependability, and impact. Metrics play a huge role in that. Clarity of my work, what am I doing? Dependability of those on my team, impact of my work. Psychological safety, this helps people answer. So this is how we took that model, turned it into questions. This is all in the book, and the book's gonna be downstairs. You can answer this on a scale, strongly agree to agree, a Likert scale. So 7 to 1, average them up, and then average across the team. That's not an average of average. We can talk about why it's not. There are several teams now that I know across the industry that are doing this quarterly, because it takes, what, just a few minutes? And you can get a nice quick pulse on how the team is feeling. And by the way, this is going to be a leading indicator. You'll find out how your team's feeling instead of after the fact. Also, sometimes people leave teams not because they're unhappy. Sometimes they leave teams because, by the way, I love my team. My team is dope. I have the best team. I do the best work. If anyone in here offers me $2 million, I'm out. Has nothing to do with my work. It has nothing to do with my culture. Okay, types of metrics we should collect. Data about systems, data from people, and then the culture stuff, just always get it from people. Here's why. If we look at our systems from a high-level view, it can look like everything's happy and running along. If we talk to our people about it, it may be a little crazy, okay? So here's an example. Let's say this is our deployment pipeline. I found an example that has like the DevOps 8 in it. I was so happy. Like, this is our pipeline. Everything's happy. It looks amazing. But as we zoom in just a tiny bit closer, this could be what it really looks like. It's automated. I don't know what your problem is. It's automated. But if we ask a couple people, they might warn us that that's what's happening. Okay, but if we like really ask people what's happening, they might tell us that what's happening is that when we push to prod, everything's fine, everything's great. We kind of need that team to be around, especially Janet and Steve, because Janet and Steve really have the process down. And as long as they're around, and as long as it's not Tuesday between 2 and 5, because Tuesday between 2 and 5, we don't know what happens, but it always breaks Tuesday between 2 and 5. And as long as they're around, it's smooth sailing. I actually know of deployments and cases and systems where that's the case. If you only look at the system data, every single deployment was successful. But it was only because the team was there to get the log out of the way. Okay, so what can we do? I love this short book, Data Driven by DJ Patel and Hilary Mason. It's like 20 pages. It's a free download. You can grab it online. The thing that I've loved about it is I've even shared it with teams saying, like, what do you think? It helps bring up the conversation in case people are not into it. Think about your own metrics, right? Again, start with outcomes, and then think about what influences outcomes. That's within your purview of control. What can I do to influence? Define and communicate. Now the key, give them meaningful names, define them well, communicate them across the boundaries that make sense for you where you sit in your organization, and remember to collect data from systems and people. So in the, I want to say November issue of ACMQ from last year, there was an article on DevOps metrics. I gave my favorite little rant about why we should collect data from systems and people to ACMQ, and they asked me to contribute an article, and so I pulled in Mick Kirsten as well. And we talk about how the two are complementary. The two, that is data from systems and data from people, are complementary, and they go together really, really well. And it's going to be difficult to get a good holistic view of your system from only one. Okay? Now, we're just about done. So to wrap up, how can leaders help influence and drive change through this complexity? So we've also included in our research a model of leadership called Transformational Leadership. There are several different models of leadership out there. There's transactional leadership, there's service leadership, and there's transformational leadership. We chose transformational leadership because through the literature, this one has been shown to be most highly predictive of outcomes. We tested it in technology and found that this holds true as well. It has 5 dimensions. So these leaders have vision. They understand where the organization and the team is going for the next 5 years. And they help communicate that to their team. So if you're a manager and you have direct reports, you can communicate that to your team. If you don't have direct reports, you can communicate that laterally, right, across your team. So you do not have to be a manager to be a leader. By the way, that's also what we found in our research. So for intellectual stimulation, you challenge the status quo and you help other people challenge the status quo as well, okay? Because this is what we need for innovation, right? Inspirational communication, you also inspire people to do good work. Those I find are really nice in balance, right? Because if you're only ever challenging, it can look like you're just complaining all the time. So you also want to have that nice positive balance. Supportive leadership, commending others for good work. That one's considering others' personal feelings, right? You have people on the team, you're thoughtful of others. Personal recognition is when you commend others for good, above average personal work, and you acknowledge improvement in the quality of work, right? You really call out what happens. Again, because you're creating an environment, particularly through intellectual stimulation, where you're challenging that status quo, you're creating an environment where you take risks and you can fail. And so you need to make it safe to fail, but then when you do see that improvement that comes of it, it needs to be a big deal. So, transformational leaders set direction and targets for their teams. They let them know what the goal is. So if you're the leader, I'm sure you know this, set the goal. If you're not the leader, don't be frustrated at this. This is their job. Now, what they also do is they amplify the work and outcomes of their teams. So, clear communication and metrics are super important because once that goal has been set, the teams should use their own expertise and autonomy to decide how to accomplish that goal. How do you get there? Trust me, I've been in places where I'm like, this goal is dumb. And so sometimes we have that back and forth, but that goal may have been given to them or very strongly encouraged by someone above them. So you know what? I'm going to take that goal, and then me and my team, our team together, are going to use our expertise and autonomy to drive toward that goal. And then in line, I may have a team underneath me, and I may say, okay, this is my goal. I'm doing everything I can to drive toward that goal. It's made up of 2 or 3 sub-goals. This is what I'm handing to you. We can decide what the right metrics are. Sorry, that may be a duplicate. Now, guiding principles, especially for this group. Focus on outcomes. I mentioned previously, outcomes and not outputs. Right? So don't do, I mean, we all know this one, right? Like, don't do lines of code. What do you accomplish with that code? Focus on global measures, not local measures. Appropriate to your context. Otherwise, you end up inadvertently, right? What are unintended consequences? Inadvertently pitting teams against each other. What's the global measure? And what's the outcome we're looking for? So thanks so much for your time. Unfortunately, that is time exactly. So I will be around all day long. There's a book signing later, and then keynote as well. So you can find me and tackle me for questions.